The house was built for silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that warned you to breathe carefully, to walk softly, to never draw attention to yourself. That silence shattered when Hana cried. It was a thin, desperate sound, small but sharp, echoing down the polished corridor like something alive. The kind of sound that didn't belong here. The kind that made grown men flinch. Someone whispered her name, urgently. Another voice hissed, panicked, telling whoever held the child to make it stop. Doors closed softly. Footsteps retreated. No one wanted to be near the noise. Because everyone in that house knew what noise meant. Kang Min-Jae did not tolerate it. He was not loud. He never needed to be. His power lived in stillness. In the way rooms adjusted themselves when he entered. In the way conversations died before he reached the doorway. Men who had survived street wars and prison riots lowered their eyes around him. He had built an empire by never hesitating, never softening, never allowing himself to be distracted by things that made others weak. And children were weakness. That was the unspoken rule. The sound of footsteps approached. Slow, deliberate. The kind that didn't rush because nothing dared stand in its way. The hallway seemed to contract, the air tightening as Kang Min-Jae appeared at the far end. He stopped. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't scowl. He simply looked toward the source of the sound. The crying stuttered, not because it was soothed, but because Hana had seen him. Her small hands reached out instead. The people watching forgot how to move. Min-Jae's gaze dropped to the child for the first time. Close enough now to see her tear-streaked face, her trembling lip, the way her fingers opened and closed as if searching for something solid. Something safe. He should have stepped back. He should have ordered someone to take her away. Instead he hesitated. It was barely noticeable. But in that house, hesitation was unheard of. When Hana was placed against his chest, the crying stopped instantly. Not slowly. Not uncertainly. It stopped like a switch had been turned off. Her body relaxed. Her head rested against him, trusting, unafraid. Min-Jae didn't move. For the first time in his life, Kang Min-Jae held a child. And the silence that followed was nothing like the silence he ruled with. It was different. It was watching. And it was waiting to see what this moment would change. Kang Min-Jae's world had been built deliberately, layer by layer, with no room for accidents. Control was the foundation. Fear was the mortar. From the outside, his residence looked like restrained luxury. Clean lines, muted stone, glass that reflected the city without revealing what lived inside. From within, it functioned like a fortress. Every step was measured. Every sound accounted for. Even the air seemed disciplined, filtered and still. Min-Jae liked it that way. He woke before dawn every day, not because of habit, but because sleep had never trusted him. Silence greeted him as he dressed in tailored black, the same color he had worn for years. Not mourning uniform. He reviewed reports while standing, never seated until necessary. Names, numbers, shipments, disputes. Problems to be solved. People to be managed. Emotion never appeared on the page. He made sure of it. Fear was efficient. Fear didn't argue. Fear didn't ask why. By the time he entered a room, everyone already knew what was expected of them. No one interrupted him. No one spoke out of turn. He didn't need to threaten. The reputation did that work for him. The stories, some true, some exaggerated, traveled faster than he ever could. He had never corrected them. Innocence was a liability in his line of work. Clouded judgment, slowed reaction time, created hesitation, and hesitation was how men died. He had learned that lesson young, in a place where survival belonged to the quickest and the coldest. There had been a time, long buried, when he believed protection meant keeping people close. That belief had cost him everything. So he had adapted. He had become something sharper, harder. A man who did not touch what could be taken from him. A man who kept distance like a weapon. Children did not exist in his world. They were not allowed in meetings, not mentioned in negotiations, not acknowledged in passing conversation. The very idea of them, soft hands, unguarded trust, felt incompatible with the reality he commanded. His men understood this without being told. They brought him results, not reminders of what he had chosen to abandon. And it worked. For years it worked perfectly. Until that night. Until a sound slipped through the structure he had perfected. Now, as Min-Jae stood alone by the floor-to-ceiling window of his private office, the city stretched beneath him in obedient lines of light. He should have been focused on the negotiations waiting downstairs, the threats that required his attention. Instead, his hands felt unfamiliar. He flexed his fingers slowly, as if testing whether they still belonged to him. They had held weapons, contracts, the weight of men's lives. They had never held something warm and unguarded, something that didn't flinch. He hadn't planned to take the child. He hadn't planned anything at all. Yet the memory refused to release him. The way Hana's breathing had evened out against his chest, the complete absence of fear in her small body. No tension. No resistance. As if she had recognized something he did not allow anyone else to see. Min-Jae frowned, irritated at himself. He did not believe in signs, or fate, or instinct that wasn't sharpened by experience. Children did not possess wisdom beyond survival reflexes. There was no meaning in what had happened. And yet, for the first time in years, the silence around him felt different. It wasn't obeying. It was asking something of him. Min-Jae turned away from the window, jaw tightening. Whatever that moment had been, it would not undo the world he had built. He would not allow a single night to rewrite the rules that had kept him alive. But as he moved toward the door, one thought followed him with unsettling clarity. In a life ruled entirely by fear, something small and fragile had entered, and the world had not ended, had paused, and he did not yet know what that meant. Hana did not belong in Kang Min-Jae's world. That was the first thought that settled in the room the morning after. His residence moved on schedules tighter than any corporate tower. Security rotated in silence. Doors opened and closed on precise cues. Even the staff spoke in low, controlled tones, as if the walls themselves were listening. Nothing unexpected survived long here. Anything out of place was removed before it became a problem. And yet there she was. Small footsteps, unsteady, barely audible, tapped against polished stone where no footsteps that light had ever been allowed. A soft breath, the faint rustle of fabric. The kind of presence that did not announce itself but changed everything anyway. Men noticed before they understood. Conversations thinned. Guards shifted their weight, unsure where to look. One of Min-Jae's lieutenants paused mid-sentence and never finished it, eyes drawn to the child hovering just inside the doorway, clutching the edge of a chair as if anchoring herself to the room. No one told Hana to leave. No one dared. She stood there with wide, observant eyes, taking in a world built to frighten adults twice her size. There was no fear in her posture, no instinct to hide, just curiosity, pure and unfiltered, aimed directly at the most dangerous man in the building. Min-Jae felt it before he saw it. The room had gone quiet again, but not the disciplined silence he commanded. This one was uncertain, waiting. He lifted his gaze from the tablet in his hands and found Hana watching him, her head tilted slightly as if studying a puzzle. "This is not appropriate," someone murmured under their breath. Min-Jae didn't respond. Rules existed for a reason. He had enforced them for years without exception. No family, no attachments, no variables that could be used against him. A child was the most dangerous variable of all. Yet when Hana took a hesitant step forward, no one moved to stop her. She wasn't crying now. She wasn't reaching. She simply walked, slowly, carefully, toward him, trusting the space to make room. Her presence bent the order of the room without effort, like water finding a new path. Min-Jae stood. The scrape of his chair against the floor was enough to make several men stiffen. He stepped around the desk, every movement controlled, deliberate. He stopped when he was close enough to see the faint crease between Hana's brows, the concentration on her face as she held her balance. She looked up at him. Close, the contrast was absurd. His tailored black suit, sharp lines, scarred knuckles. Her small hands, unmarked, reaching out not for safety but for connection. Min-Jae should have turned away. Instead, he lowered himself to one knee. The room forgot how to breathe. Hana smiled, not wide, not excited. Just a quiet, satisfied curve of her lips, as if something had been confirmed. She leaned forward, placing her weight against him without hesitation. The warmth of her body was immediate, grounding, real. Min-Jae's hands hovered for a fraction of a second before settling, steady and sure. He adjusted his hold instinctively, protecting her head, supporting her back. Muscle memory he did not recognize guided him. "This changes things," someone whispered. Min-Jae heard it. He also knew they were right. Hana's presence was not loud, did not demand attention. But it disrupted the hierarchy more effectively than any threat ever had. Men who feared Min-Jae now feared something else, what he might become if this continued. Min-Jae rose, Hana secure against him, and the room shifted to accommodate him automatically. Paths cleared. Doors opened. He did not look back. For the first time, his world bent around something fragile. And for the first time he did not correct it. The warning came too late. "Don't touch him." The words weren't spoken aloud at first. They lived in the tension that snapped tight across the room, in the sharp inhale of men who had survived long enough to know when something had gone terribly wrong. Eyes widened. Hands hovered near weapons out of instinct, not intent. Fear recalibrated itself, searching for a shape it understood. Because everyone knew what happened when rules were broken. And Hana had broken the oldest one. Kang Min-Jae did not allow contact, not familiarity, not closeness, not hands on his person unless invited. And invitations were rare, measured, strategic. Men who crossed that line learned quickly that apologies did not erase mistakes. So when the child's small fingers curled into the fabric of his jacket, the room braced for impact. Min-Jae felt it, the shift in the air, the collective certainty that this would end badly. He had seen that look before on countless faces. The look people wore just before something irreversible happened. He did not blame them for expecting violence. For a fraction of a second, his body reacted the way it always had. Muscles tightened. Breath slowed. Awareness narrowed. The reflex was there. Sharp, precise, lethal if needed. Then Hana pressed her cheek against his chest. The tension in him stalled, confused by the unfamiliar weight. She wasn't grabbing, wasn't clinging in panic. She was steady, certain. Her breathing fell into a soft rhythm, unbothered by the rigid body she leaned against. Min-Jae did not move. A single drop of time stretched longer than it should have. Someone swallowed audibly. Another man shifted his stance, ready to intervene, unsure whether to protect the child or brace for the fallout. No one spoke. No one dared. Min-Jae lowered his gaze. Hana looked impossibly small from this angle. Her lashes fluttered once, then settled. Her trust was absolute, unearned, and dangerous in a way no threat had ever been. He had been feared for decades. She was not afraid at all. Min-Jae adjusted his grip. Slowly, deliberately, ensuring her head was supported, her body balanced. The movement was careful enough to border on reverent. It was the opposite of what everyone expected. A breath escaped him before he could stop it. The room froze harder than before. This wasn't mercy. This wasn't indulgence. It was something far more unsettling, restraint born not of discipline but of choice. Someone finally spoke, voice brittle. "Boss, the child." "I know," Min-Jae said. His tone was calm, even. Carried no warning, no threat. That alone was enough to silence the room completely. Hana shifted slightly, her fingers tightening for a moment before relaxing again. Min-Jae felt the heat of her small body through layers of fabric, felt how easily she fit into the space he had kept empty for so long. He remembered hands like this once. Smaller, colder. Slipping away. The memory struck without permission, sharp enough to sting. He pushed it down immediately, sealing it behind the same walls he had built years ago. This was not the place. This was not the time. But the child remained, alive, unharmed. Min-Jae straightened, turning slowly so everyone could see her clearly. No blood, no punishment, no disaster. Only a child in his arms. "You will give us space," he said. It was not a request. Men stepped back at once, creating distance, uncertainty etched into their faces. The rules had not just been bent, they had been rewritten in real time, and no one knew what the new ones were yet. Min-Jae walked past them without another word. Behind him, the room exhaled all at once. Everyone had expected disaster. What they witnessed instead was something far more dangerous. Min-Jae had held many things in his life. Consequences. He had held a gun steady while deciding a man's future. He had held a pen that signed orders no one questioned. He had held silence so tightly that it bent rooms around him. All of it familiar. All of it controlled. None of it felt like this. Hana was lighter than he expected. Not just in weight but in presence. She did not strain his arms or demand adjustment. She fit, as if his body had been shaped for this long before he ever knew it. Her head rested against his chest, warm through the fabric of his suit, her breath shallow and even. Min-Jae stopped walking. The corridor ahead was empty, cleared without instruction. No one followed. No one spoke. The world had narrowed to the space between his arms and the small body they protected. He stood there longer than necessary, staring down at the top of Hana's head. Fine strands of hair brushed his wrist. His fingers twitched once, uncertain, then settled more firmly against her back. The sensation unsettled him. It was not weakness. It was awareness. Every movement he made adjusted instinctively to her. When she shifted, he compensated. When her breathing changed, he noticed. A part of his mind, one that had always been alert for threats, recalibrated itself around something fragile. This was not a position of power. It was responsibility. Min-Jae felt it settle into him with quiet weight. Hana stirred slightly, one hand sliding up to grip his lapel. The contact was soft, clumsy, unintentional, and it struck harder than any blow he had taken in years. He inhaled slowly, grounding himself, keeping his body steady so he would not startle her. She trusted him. The realization cut deeper than fear ever had. Trust meant expectation. It meant that if he failed, there would be consequences he could not erase with money or force. It meant that something small and innocent believed he would not let it fall. Min-Jae had spent his life ensuring no one ever expected that of him. He lowered himself onto a bench along the wall, movements controlled, deliberate. Hana remained asleep, her body slack with complete comfort. Min-Jae watched her chest rise and fall, counted the breaths without knowing why. Time slowed. Memories pressed at the edges of his mind. Unwanted, persistent. A smaller hand slipping from his grasp years ago. Promise made too late. A night that ended with silence far heavier than this one. His jaw tightened. This was different, he told himself. This meant nothing. Coincidence. An interruption. A moment that would pass. But even as the thought formed, he knew it was a lie. Min-Jae adjusted his hold again, carefully tucking Hana closer, shielding her from the chill of the stone walls. The action came without calculation, without command. It was instinct, raw and unfiltered. He had not chosen this moment. But he was choosing now. When he finally stood, the decision was already made. Whatever this was, whatever had shifted the night Hana had been placed in his arms, it would not be undone by denial. He walked on, carrying her with the same steadiness he applied to everything else in his life. Only now, for the first time, his strength was being used to hold something that did not fear him. And Min-Jae understood with quiet certainty that this first time would change everything that followed. The memory came without warning. Not as images at first, but as sensation, The weight in his arms, the careful way he held Hana, the instinct to shield her. His body remembered something his mind had spent years erasing. Min-Jae stopped in the quiet of his private room, the door closing behind him with a soft seal. The city beyond the glass walls glittered, distant and indifferent. He lowered himself onto the edge of the bed, Hana still asleep against his chest, her warmth steady and real. That was when the past broke through. He had been younger then. Not weak, never weak, but unguarded in ways he no longer allowed. He remembered a smaller room, colder, lit by a single flickering bulb. He remembered hands reaching for him, trusting without question. A voice calling his name the way no one had since. He remembered failing. The details had blurred over time, filed down by repetition and denial. But the core of it had never changed. A moment where he had chosen speed over patience, distance over protection. A moment where he had believed he could fix things later. Later never came. Min-Jae's jaw clenched as the memory sharpened, as it always did when it slipped past his defenses. The weight of responsibility pressed against his ribs, heavier now because Hana was still there, breathing softly, unaware of the storm she had stirred. He had buried that night deep, buried the grief beneath discipline, buried the guilt beneath power. He told himself that survival required it, that becoming what the world feared was the only way to ensure no one could ever take from him again. He had been wrong. The loss had not hardened him the way he thought. It had hollowed him out, left space where something vital used to live. Space he filled with control, with order, with fear so precise it passed for strength. Min-Jae looked down at Hana's face, relaxed in sleep. Her lashes cast faint shadows against her cheeks. Her hand rested against his chest, fingers curled loosely, confident he would still be there when she woke. The ache that rose in him was sharp and unfamiliar. "I couldn't protect her," he murmured, the words barely sound. He didn't know why he said it. Hana couldn't hear him. Perhaps that was the point. He had never spoken it aloud before. Min-Jae exhaled slowly, steadying himself. This was dangerous. Letting the past surface like this, letting it bleed into the present. He had survived by keeping such things locked away. But the lock had broken. Hana shifted slightly, her brow furrowing for a brief second before smoothing again. Without thinking, Min-Jae adjusted his hold, easing the movement, offering comfort he had once believed himself incapable of giving. The memory receded, not gone but quieter, less sharp. He understood then that this was the real threat. Not enemies, not betrayal, not violence, but the possibility that he could feel this again. That he could care enough to lose something twice. Min-Jae lifted his gaze to the darkened glass. His reflection faint and unfamiliar. He looked the same as he always had. Controlled. Unreadable. But inside something had shifted. He had buried the memory to survive. Now, holding Hana, he realized survival was no longer enough. And for the first time since that long-ago night, Kang Min-Jae wondered what it would mean. Not to forget the past, but to answer it. Protection had always meant one thing to Kang Min-Jae. Elimination. You identified a threat, removed it, and ensured it never returned. Clean. Efficient. Permanent. That was how empires survived. That was how he had survived. Violence, when used correctly, simplified the world into manageable shapes. But Hana did not fit into that equation. Min-Jae stood by the window again. The city laid out beneath him like a map of pressure points and routes. He held Hana securely against his shoulder, her weight a steady reminder that not everything could be solved by force. Somewhere below, engines hummed, lives moved, deals unfolded without his direct involvement, and for the first time he let them. He listened instead. To Hana's breathing. To the soft, irregular rhythm that demanded patience rather than precision. Responsibility, he realized, was slower than violence. It required presence. It required restraint. It demanded that he remain when instinct told him to strike or withdraw. That was the difference. A knock came at the door, light, cautious. Min-Jae did not turn. "Boss," a voice said from the other side. Security has confirmed the perimeter. The situation downstairs is contained. Contained meant frightened but obedient. It always did. Good, Min-Jae replied. There was a pause. What would you like us to do about the child? Min-Jae's reflection in the glass looked back at him, composed and unreadable. The question was reasonable. In his world, nothing unaccounted for was allowed to remain. Nothing, he said. Another pause, longer this time. Understood. The footsteps retreated. Min-Jae looked down at Hana. She stirred slightly, her face turning toward the warmth of his neck. He adjusted without thinking, his hand firm and gentle at once. The realization settled quietly. If danger came, his first instinct would no longer be to end it. It would be to shield her. That was new. He thought of the countless times he had chosen violence because it was easier than care, faster than patience, safer than hope. He had convinced himself those choices were necessary, that responsibility ended where fear began. Hana breathed unconcerned. Responsibility, he understood now, was choosing not to make the world smaller for the sake of control. It was choosing to carry weight instead of dropping it on someone else. It was standing between harm and what could not defend itself, and staying there. Min-Jae straightened, decision settling into him with the same certainty he once reserved for bloodshed. He would not allow Hana to become leverage. He would not let her presence be discovered by those who would see only weakness. He would not correct this disruption by removing it. He would protect it. That meant changes, rules rewritten, lines redrawn. It meant that some methods, effective though they were, would have to be set aside, not because he was incapable of using them but because he chose not to. Violence was still a tool. It was no longer the answer. Min-Jae moved away from the window, carrying Hana toward the interior of the room where the light was softer, the angles less sharp. He laid her down carefully, watching until her breathing evened again, until her small body settled into sleep untouched by fear. Standing there, hands empty now, Min-Jae felt the weight of responsibility fully for the first time. And he accepted it. Not as penance. Purpose. Change did not announce itself in Kang Min-Jae's world. Showed up in pauses. In the way orders were given, and sometimes withheld. In the way rooms no longer tightened quite as sharply when he entered. In the way men began to look twice, uncertain not of his authority, but of its direction. Min-Jae allowed this. That alone unsettled them. The first time he walked into a meeting with Hana nearby, not hidden, not rushed away, the reaction was immediate. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Eyes flicked toward the child, then quickly back to him, as if afraid to be caught noticing the impossible. No one spoke. Min-Jae took his seat without comment. Hana remained where she was, small and quiet, absorbed in something only she could see. He did not gesture for her removal. He did not explain. He let the silence do the work. Men who had watched him order executions without blinking now struggled to process this new reality. Not because they doubted his capacity for violence, but because they were witnessing restraint made visible. This was not weakness. Weakness hid. This stood in the open. Min-Jae felt the shift as clearly as any threat assessment. Power was recalibrating itself around him, adjusting to a version of authority that no longer relied solely on fear. That made some uneasy. It made others loyal in ways fear never achieved. A lieutenant spoke carefully, choosing words like steps across thin ice. Boss, should arrangements be made? Min-Jae met his gaze calmly. They already are. The conversation moved on. That night, when he walked the corridors with Hana's presence known, no one looked away. They watched, measured, took note. This was how rumors were born, not from whispers but from witnessed truth. Min-Jae understood the risk. Letting the world see meant letting enemies see too. Vulnerability invited challenge. Innocence drew attention. But hiding Hana would have meant treating her like a liability. She was not. She was a boundary. Min-Jae stopped in a common area where several of his men were stationed. He did not raise his voice. He did not posture. "She is under my protection," he said simply. No qualifiers. No threats. The message landed harder than any warning ever had. Men nodded. Some with relief. Some with fear. All with understanding. Later, alone again, Min-Jae considered the weight of what he had done. The world now knew something it hadn't before. That there was a line even he would not allow to be crossed. Hana slept nearby, untouched by the gravity of it all. Min-Jae watched her for a long moment, then turned his attention back to the city beyond the glass. He knew what would come next. Tests, pressure, attempts to probe this change for weakness. He welcomed them. Because this time he was not protecting an image. He was protecting something real. And the world would learn the difference. Risk had always been calculated in Kang Min-Jae's world. You weighed cost against outcome. You chose the path that preserved control. Anything that introduced uncertainty was eliminated before it could grow teeth. That discipline had kept him alive when others with louder tempers and weaker instincts had disappeared. Hana changed the math. Min-Jae became aware of it the moment reports crossed his desk with a different tone. Questions masked as observations. Movements noted where there had once been obedience. Too much interest in schedules that were usually ignored. Too many eyes lingering where they should not. Someone had noticed. He read the names carefully, committing patterns to memory. This was not an attack yet. It was reconnaissance. A probing of edges to see how far this new boundary extended. Hana slept in the adjoining room, guarded more heavily than any asset he had ever protected. Men rotated shifts silently. No one complained. No one asked why. They understood the stakes instinctively. Still, Min-Jae knew something his men did not. Walls only worked until someone decided to climb them. He stood in the dim light of his office, phone pressed to his ear, voice calm as he redirected a shipment route. The conversation ended with a single word of confirmation. Efficient. Normal. When he lowered the phone, his gaze drifted toward the closed door beyond which Hana rested. Normal was no longer enough. A familiar instinct stirred, one he had relied on for decades. The urge to strike first. To erase the potential threat before it could become real. He could have done it easily. Names, locations, leverage. The problem would vanish quietly, as problems always had. But Hana would still be there. And the world that made such preemptive violence necessary would remain unchanged. Min-Jae exhaled slowly. Protecting Hana meant something different. It meant accepting exposure. It meant allowing others to test him instead of silencing them immediately. It meant choosing restraint even when violence would have been simpler. That choice carried risk. If he misjudged even once, the consequences would not be his alone. A knock interrupted his thoughts. One of his senior men entered, face serious. "Boss, we've identified a potential breach. Nothing confirmed yet, but I recommend tightening protocols." Min-Jae nodded. "Do it." There was a pause. "And if it escalates?" Min-Jae met his eyes. "Then I handle it." The man hesitated, then spoke carefully. "With respect, this situation is different." Min-Jae did not correct him. "Yes," he said. "It is." The man left, understanding more than had been said. Min-Jae moved quietly into the next room. Hana lay curled on her side, fingers tucked beneath her chin, completely unaware of the danger orbiting her existence. He watched her for a long moment, imprinting the sight into himself. This was the risk. Not enemies. Not betrayal. He had chosen to care again, knowing exactly what it could cost him. That was the danger no weapon could defend against. Min-Jae reached out, brushing a knuckle lightly against the edge of the blanket near Hana's hand. Not touching her, just close enough to feel present. "I won't fail you," he murmured. The promise settled heavily in his chest. For the first time in years, Kang Min-Jae had made a choice that endangered him not because it weakened him, but because it mattered. And he would face whatever came next standing in front of it, not behind. Night settled differently now. It did not press in on Kang Min-Jae the way it used to, heavy with calculations and contingency plans. The darkness beyond the glass still held danger, still hid men who would test him if given the chance, but inside the quiet of his residence, something had shifted permanently. Hana woke just after midnight. Not crying, not afraid, just awake. Min-Jae was already there when her eyes opened, seated nearby, the light kept low. He had learned her rhythms quickly, how she stirred before waking, how stillness comforted her more than sound. When she saw him, her mouth curved into a small, unmistakable smile. It was not gratitude. It was recognition. She reached out without hesitation. Min-Jae stood and lifted her gently, the motion smooth now, practiced. He felt the familiar warmth settle against him, felt her relax as if this was exactly where she expected to be. The ease of it no longer startled him. They stood together by the window, the city lights scattered like distant stars. Min-Jae adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, shielding her from the cool glass. "This place is loud," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Even when it pretends not to be." Hana yawned, unimpressed. A soft sound escaped him then. Not laughter, not quite, but something close enough that it surprised them both. He felt it resonate in his chest, unfamiliar but not unwelcome. For years, redemption had seemed like a word meant for other people. Softer men. Men who could afford regret. He had believed survival required him to remain exactly as he was. Untouched, unchanging. He had been wrong. Redemption, he realized, was not absolution. It did not erase what he had done or the lives shaped by his choices. It did not make him gentle. Gave him direction. Holding Hana, Min-Jae understood that redemption was responsibility carried forward. Not denied, not hidden, but faced openly. It was choosing to protect something fragile without expecting it to fix him in return. Hana shifted, her head settling beneath his chin. Her trust was complete. Min-Jae closed his eyes briefly, letting the moment imprint itself into him. Not as penance, as proof. When he opened them again, his reflection in the glass looked the same as ever. Sharp, composed, unyielding. But the man behind that image had changed in ways no enemy could exploit and no ally could misunderstand. He would still be feared. But he would also be known for something else. When Min-Jae finally carried Hana back to bed and watched her drift into sleep, he did not linger out of uncertainty. He stayed because he chose to. Because staying no longer felt like weakness. As he turned out the light, one thought settled with quiet certainty. The night he first held a child did not erase his past. It gave his future meaning. And Kang Min-Jae, once ruled entirely by fear, stepped into the darkness not as a man seeking redemption, but as one who had found it.